the BHAW Army Wrestling Radio Show. I'm Jordan Tom, followed Brian Rowan, and we got a really special guest here for episode 16. He's got a long list of accolades. I'm going to name a couple of them. He was the first ever four-time state champion in Iowa high school history. He was an NCAA All-American. He's an inductee in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. He's a class of 66 graduate, a Vietnam veteran, and a published author and motivational speaker. And I am privileged to have Bob Steenlage on tonight. Bob, how are you?
Good.
Great.
Glad to be here tonight.
Awesome. Well, we've had the pleasure.
Really appreciate you coming on. And just for the listeners, I was going to say, just so the listeners know, Bob has told us several times to call him Bob and not sir. So we're not being disrespectful. We're just giving him his wishes. But you know, I know some people out there are like, why are you calling him sir? So I want to throw that out there, just so everybody knows too. Don't want to get in trouble with Bob.
All right. Well, we got a lot on the docket for Bob. He's got a lot of awesome stories that I'm excited for everybody to hear. We've got kind of the Cliff Notes version so far. But starting in the beginning, Bob, with your high school career, you accomplished something that was historic. It was unprecedented at the time by becoming, the state of Iowa's first ever four-time state champion. And I know, talking with you briefly, that this certainly didn't come by accident. Talk us through growing up in your early childhood and what drove you to that mentality that you set that high goal and then also achieved it.
Okay. Well, it's fairly involved, but I'll try to be as brief as I can. I was born on February 28th, 1944, when my dad was on the way to Sicily for World War II. And he was wounded there and came home a year or so later. And anyway, he had issues from World War II. And I had a younger brother, 4 years younger, and another brother, 6 years younger, and two younger sisters. And we had a very dysfunctional family. And I had a very bad relationship with my father. And being from a dysfunctional family, I had lots of issues. I was very poor student. In fact, I just came across this the other day, sorting out a file. I don't know why I still had it. So in my third grade, it shows that I was in the bottom third of the class. And in every area or worse than that. So the chances of me ever having any kind of success in life, in sports or in life, was not real probable. So I'll share briefly as I can what happened. One day, my dad, who's a volunteer fireman, took our family to a family fireman picnic. And we were kind of looked down on as a poor family and dysfunctional. And so anyway, we walked into this area where the picnic was at the fairgrounds. There were several tables whispering and pointing at us, just like we were a minority of some sort, And there were no minorities in the little town of Britt, Iowa, but that's how I felt. And I was a very sensitive child, and it just bothered me so much. And as I went by several tables, and they were saying the bad things about our family and this and that, and I just couldn't take it anymore. And something happened inside of me, just like an explosion. And I vowed in my lifetime, I'm never, ever, ever going to make fun of another person because it makes you feel so horrible. And then another thing that happened, I'm going to prove to them, and I'm going to be somebody. Something happened in my heart that started a series of things in my life. I couldn't answer questions in class. I used to look around and see why everybody asked me questions. And then since I made that decision to do something, I got a good sixth grade teacher. I got a good seventh grade teacher. I got some good teachers and so forth. And then when I was going into seventh grade, I had a dream. And in this dream, so a John Deere tractor and how a mechanic comes out and fixes it. And the dream said that human beings are the same way. And the dream it said, most people are lazy. Doesn't make a difference if you're IQ and so forth. If you're willing to outwork them, you can outwork them. Most people are lazy. The second thing that came to me is that kindness in life will be of great benefit to you. And so I was already that way, but even more so from that dream, I'm going to be as kind as I can to everybody at all times. The next thing that came to me is to be thankful. So I'm thankful for this, I'm thankful for that. I can tell you story after story. And I learned how to be thankful for bad things, because if you're thankful for the bad things, they turn out to be good things in the long run and so forth. So my life began to change. So from going at the bottom of the class, all of a sudden, I started raising up and raising up and raising up in my thoughts. And then I wanted to go off for sports. I weighed 75 pounds in 7th grade. So I played football through high school, small school, but I was small. Ran track, I wasn't very good at track. But wrestling was weight classes. So I weighed 75 pounds in 7th grade. And my mother's mother, my grandmother, and my mother and I, we were very close. And one day, and it so happened that wrestling was really big in northern Iowa at the time. And one of the reasons is because of a man by the name of Frank Gotch, who was from a town not too far from mine. Frank Gotch was a professional wrestler, and he was as famous at that time as Muhammad Ali was now. And Teddy Roosevelt actually had him come to the White House to wrestle some other countries and so forth. So wrestling was the talk of Iowa, especially in the northern Iowa, and they started wrestling in my school. So I decided to tell my mom and grandmother, never told another soul, if I'm going to make something out of my life, I'm going to set a high goal. So my goal is to be the first person in Iowa to win the state championship 4 years in a row. And that is how the whole thing started. One step at a time and one step at a time. And just a couple stories before we go on to West Point and so forth, is that I had a surrogate father and my coach from 7th grade through my junior year. And he was on the Olympic team or an alternate and wrestled at Iowa State. He was a great, great coach. And he helped me along greatly. And then during my junior and senior year, when I went to football practice that fall, my coach wasn't there. I couldn't believe it. And I started asking around, and they said there was some trouble with the school board, and he got fed up with this or something, and he left town. So here's my surrogate coach for 7th grade through junior year, going for the 4th-time championship, and he's gone. Never even said anything. So there's a choice I had to make. Am I going to pout? Am I going to feel sorry for myself? Or am I going to be thankful for this great loss and look for good? My new coach was Jim Craig, national champion, University of Iowa, 175-pounder. So that was not an advantage. I used to work out with my coach and so forth. And they made the coach promise he wouldn't work out with me because he didn't want me to get hurt or something. Well, anyway, as it turns out, if I hadn't had that new coach, I never would have won it the 4th time, because the pressure was so great. And this is all like life to me, so pardon me if I get emotional at times. But the newspapers would say that it can't be done. Nobody can do it. Nobody can do it. And then one day I talked my coach to go and takedowns, and I hurt my back. And I missed my first day of practice, and it's 2 weeks of practice. And they said I wasn't going to wrestle again. I got back 10 days before the tournaments. And one of the things I relied on was being in better shape than anybody else. When I walked on the mat, I knew I did more push-ups, more pull-ups, threw more bales of hay, worked on the farm. I knew that I was in better shape. Now I didn't have that advantage. So in the semifinals, I wrestled somebody where I hurt my arm really bad. And they didn't rush you off to the doctor right away. But the Iowa State coach was the referee of that match. And he told me, Coach, it's a suggestion, let Steenlage just roll around in the restroom with his sweats on, bring something to eat, don't take him out. Because in the finals, if that stiffens up, they're going to take him someplace and get him x-rayed. So essentially, when I got x-rayed on Thursday, I had a separated shoulder. So I'm wrestling in the finals with a separated shoulder, not knowing at the time. And my coach was devastated that he was the one that hurt me. And his wife told me, please, please win. because her husband would take this with him the rest of his life. So I found out that going through pain and reaching a goal for somebody else will drive you more than doing it yourself. And there was so much pressure, I was just wearing out. So I had to win it for the coach. Otherwise, it would affect him the rest of his life. So anyway, the match was very close. It was 2-2. Going into the third period, he was down. He told me like many years later that he had never been held down, and I didn't have my grip. Anyway, the match went back and forth, and somehow we never got away, and the score ended up to be 2-2. And so either we're going into overtime, or I had rising time. So there was a big hush in the whole tournament. And they had all these judges over there trying to figure out how much riding time there was and so forth. So after a long time, pretty soon the referee comes back, and I'm watching his eyes to see if I could get any kind of an answer, indication whether I got to go overtime, and there was no indication. He walks up to me, shakes my hand, shoots my arm up in the air, my separated shoulder, pain went up and down, and says, "Congratulations, you just won the championship for the 4th time." And the crowd, there was my mother and
Wow.
my mother never impressed me. And my grandmother was always afraid I was going to get hurt. And she got a job emptying bedpans in Chicago and sent the money to my mother to help raise us. But she got on a plane and flew to the state tournament every year, sat up there with her coat over her head, watching if I was still alive and so forth. And to see my mom and grandmother and how happy they were. And then all of a sudden they make this announcement, for the first time in the history of the world. Then there was a big pause. Not the world, Iowa. For the first time in the state of Iowa, somebody won the state champion for the 4th time. And it turned out that Mike Johnson from Pennsylvania had won it the year before, who I wrestled in the finals of the Easterns later on. So that's how the whole thing started, as far as the goals in high school.
No, I really appreciate you sharing that, Bob. I mean, that's when you're telling us that a little bit of that on the show, or the pre-show when we were talking through that, I was getting goosebumps just thinking about like the good pain that would happen when he raised your arm, and the kind of words that the referee said to you.
Yes.
So something that's kind of interesting, Bob, is you had this great success in high school, and it was historic at the time. And then coming up right behind you is Dan Gable. Did you have any kind of relationship with him growing up, or was that kind of after the fact? What's kind of the deal with that?
Well, it's after the fact. He's 4 years younger, and one of the things he's disappointed in his career that he never won a 4-time wasn't his fault. He was from a big school, Waterloo, where they had the high school divided in 9 through 12, and so he could not wrestle in varsity as a freshman. Otherwise, but he was 4 years younger. It so happened my brother was 4 years younger, and Dan Gable and my brother Les got hired at the University of Iowa at the same time. My brother to be an assistant AD and Dan to be the coach. And because of wrestling, my brother Dan and I have become very close friends.
Wow, small world. So something you mentioned was that your high school coach was really successful. He's an Olympian, Iowa State graduate, and then your second coach your senior year was an Iowa guy. I guess I'm just curious what drove your decision to attend West Point rather than maybe what seemed kind of obvious at staying home and you stayed at Iowa and attending one of those universities?
Interesting question. I actually got a letter from Coach Alex my junior year, 1961. And he was a coach at Osage, Iowa, which is a competition of us in northern Iowa. And he went from high school coach to being the coach at West Point. So he did a lot of recruiting from Iowa. So I got a letter from Coach Alex about the possibility of going to West Point. And I'm ashamed to tell you this, but this was way back and we kind of lived in the sticks. I didn't even know what West Point was. So he told me about it and asked me to take some tests. And and I was going to different colleges and so forth, and checking out campuses and so forth. But anyway, and even though I was a hard worker, I don't do very well on standard tests. So I took the test to get into West Point and somehow passed the test. And then, this is an actual postcard dated April 1962. It's a postcard from Berlin, East Berlin, Brandenburg Gate. And here is my notification from Coach Alex that I've been accepted into West Point.
Wow.
So that's
Coach Ward needs to step up his game.
That's awesome you kept that.
That's awesome. That's not what they're handing out now. That's cool.
So anyway, that's how it started. Awesome. And so it was more, I don't know, I just got caught up in it or something, it was such an honor to go to West Point. And there was no talk about war. If there was talk about war at that time, I probably wouldn't have gone because, because of what happened to my dad and so forth. So I went there to get a free education and to wrestle. That's why I went. And I was able to get a regular appointment through our congressman at that time.
Well, talking through some of the specifics with West Point, the joke is that West Point never really changes and everything stays the same, and it's kind of its own little snow globe. However, obviously a lot of things have changed since the 60s, just from a standpoint of modernization with internet and computers, cell phones, probably some of the way that they did things. Can you talk us through what it was like going to West Point in the early 60s and just any funny academy stories or folklore that you were involved in? We'd love to hear that.
Sure. The plebe system way back in the 60s, in my opinion, was not good. But most cadets, all these years, said if I went through it, they're going to go through it. And it was very, very hard to change. And finally, I can't remember the superintendent that actually was able to stay at West Point more than 2 years, and he was able to get it changed. But the West Point plebe system was ridiculous and was not conducive to producing good Army officers in the sense they could do anything to you. You can't do anything to your soldiers. They could starve you. You had to sit on 6 inches of your chair. You had to hold your chin in all the time. And if somebody took a disliking to you, they could just keep giving you demerits. And there were many good officers, potential officers that got kicked out just because some of our classmen, didn't like them. And many of these, some of these that got kicked out went to ROTC or something and won silver stars and different things in Vietnam. So there was just many, many faults with the plebe system. And so my roommate and I, Mark and I in particular, we just disagreed with the plebe system. And we were not very good upperclassmen because we didn't do all that junk to the plebe. We tried to treat them like soldiers, and so forth. So the plebe system needed to be changed into something more like the real Army. And finally it did. And when we left, we didn't think that would actually happen in our lifetime, but it did. And my roommate, Mark Squirman, who's also an All-American third place finisher at the Nationals, when we graduated, he threw away everything that reminded him of West Point because of the plebe system, because he had a good friend that got run out and later won the Silver Star in Vietnam and so forth. So he was very bitter against the plebe system. But anyway, as his friend, I thought, well, I'm going to save a few things. As you can see, I have my cadet hat and tar bucket and a few other things in the back there. But I pulled Mark's tar bucket out of the garbage. And I thought, someday I'm going to send this to him. Well, it wasn't, we kept it in storage and so forth. Long story short, 2 months ago, I pulled it out of storage and sent it to him. And you never saw a more happy camper to get that tar bucket after 54 years. He took pictures of the tar bucket. So after 54
that must have been amazing for him.
Yeah, it really was. There's so many things that I can share, that happened at West Point and so forth. One of the things I might share with you in just no particular order is that there is a book, a famous book about our class called The Long Gray Line by Rick Atkinson, and it's considered to be made into a movie at one time. And it's a true story of several of our classmates that followed them getting into West Point, through West Point, and through Vietnam. This is one of the best books you ever can read in West Point. And these are people that most of them are still alive. And one of those is George Crocker. He was from my company, F2. And at that time, as a two-star general, he was featured on U.S. News Report. And there was big articles in here all about our class and so forth. So I would recommend that information. Something else that comes to mind is that our class is the one that was responsible for actually stealing the Navy goat. I mean, all through history of West Point, I think there was only one other time that it happened. But anyway, there's a book by Tom Carhart, who was one of those that actually was involved in stealing the Navy goat. Here's a picture of them with the Navy goat. And,
awesome.
Anyway, this is an excellent book. And it so happened that Billy, the goat at the time, was guarded by Marines at one of the most secure military bases in the United States. And I can't remember, 6 or 7 of my classmates got in there and got him out. And it's just unbelievable story.
Did they get in any trouble for that?
Well, they were going to, I mean, they had the top brass at the Pentagon kick them out, kick them out, kick them out. Superintendent at Navy, kick them out, kick them out, kick them out. But as it got out on the press was the other way. They're heroes, another Patton, another Eisenhower. Anyway, in the book, it tells them how they went through to the committee, and they were very close to getting kicked out. And finally, the pressure was relieved from the generals and admirals and stuff, and they got the Navy going back. And so they got off with a minor punishment. But the whole time, they were ready to get kicked out and everything. But it's a magnificent story. Tom was one of them. Another interesting thing is General Westmoreland was the superintendent at West Point my first 2 years. And he loved wrestling. And I remember whenever he came into wherever the meet was, everybody would have to stand except 2 of the ones who were wrestling, So anyway, at the end of '64, he went to become the commander in Vietnam. So I graduated in '66, Airborne Ranger School. So by '68, I ended up in Vietnam, and also all of a sudden at this one place in Vietnam where I was, they said General Westmoreland's coming. Of course, we're not anxious to see the general. We're all grubby and had a shave and a few things like that. So anyway, General Westmoreland's coming down the line, and I'm just lined up like many other soldiers. And this is exactly how it happened. He stopped, looked at my face, looked at my name tag, looked at my face, looked at my name tag, looked at my face and said, "How did wrestling go your last 2 years?" And I said, "I fainted." He cared that much about his cadets and so forth, and remembered 4 years later. Anyway, when he sent me his personal book, he wrote this in the front of the book. It says, "To Bob Steenlage, one of my favorite cadets and fellow Vietnam vet, with best wishes always, William Westmoreland, January of '90." So that's one of my treasures. And then when we were at our class reunion, we visited, the cemetery and his gravesite. He's buried at West Point. Now, these are some of the particular things in general and so forth. I can get more specific, and because enough questions that you've written are so interesting, I don't want to skip any of them. But Mark Skirman and Bob Robbins and I were so close, and we were all Americans. Only class at West Point that had 3 All-Americans.
Mhm.
And if you go into the Arvin Gymnasium, Bob Arvin was the captain of the team the year before me and got killed in Vietnam, and the gym's named after him. You'll see our picture up there with the team with Bob Arvin. And when we were there in 16, we had a picture pointing up there taken with him and so forth. But we were all kind of known as the 3 Musketeers, and we were very close. And the talk around the Corps was, if those 3 guys end up in Vietnam and somebody threw a grenade on them, they'd be pushing each other off to fall on the grenade to save the other person. We were that close, and supported each other, and we were known as the rough, tough wrestlers. And one tournament we were at, we had a little time off, so we went to the only movie was a Bambi movie, and each one of us are trying to keep from crying, and pretty soon all 3 of us in the Bambi movie with tears coming down our cheeks and so forth. So many, I'm just going to check some of my notes.
Well, there's definitely one story we want to hear about.
Okay, before we go there, this is one thing when I'm thinking of it. Sometime you asked a question about did we have calculators and so forth there. West Point was one of the first places in the United States to have a computer, big, huge room with cards and everything, the first computer, and we used slide rules for all our engineering classes and so forth. And it's quite interesting how you can come up with answers in general and so forth, but we used those, and it wasn't a year or so later that we had they had calculators and so forth. So anyway, what was your question? One story? There's lots of stories, but did you have one in mind?
I want to hear the story of you sneaking your girlfriend in the mess hall that one time. You didn't tell the full story on the pre-show, but I really want to hear that you elaborate on that.
Okay.
Yeah, considering there was no females at the academy at the time.
Females at the academy and so forth. Anyway, Mark used to kid my wife all the time about things like she's 2.5. I met her when I came home my sophomore year, and she had her teaching job in my hometown. So she taught 2 years in Britt, Iowa, and my last year she got a teaching job near West Point. And so she's 2.5 years older. Mark used to always kid her, you're going to be 25 and a quarter of a century old and so forth. He was always picking on her, in a good way and so forth. And he says, why don't you sneak in the mess hall? Well, my wife of 54 years, it's from the farm and kind of adventurous and so forth. So she said, okay. So only Mark, myself, and Bobby, my future wife, knew about it. So we planned this whole thing out just like a military operation, and she was able to fit in my uniform and everything and so forth. In fact, I'll show you a picture. And so anyway, we lived in North area, and so she put on the cadet clothes, put her clothes on top, got on post. They had recognized her. She parked where the gym is, and then it was real close to getting to the north area. And we had everything. We had no no cell phones or anything. And at an exact certain time before the morning breakfast formation of the day we graduated, just like a military operation, she took off in the car, her clothes. She had the cadet uniform on, got out of the car, looked around, put her hat on, came back of the superintendent's house, came marching into North area. Mark and I are standing on the stoops. If we had a cell phone, we would have called it off right then, because we forgot about one thing. Women in military uniforms with trousers on from the back look much different from men because of their wider hips. And so we knew if there was attack in the area, they would have spotted her. So we already thought we were in trouble. But anyway, she got into formation, and we told the whole company that we're going to try sneaking her in the mess hall. Man, they just thought the most wonderful thing. So they found her, and we had taught her how to march and everything. So we found a place in formation. So we get to the steps, and the tall cadets gathered around her, and so they didn't see her. She went up the steps and she got to one of the tables and so forth. And the plan was if a tag came around, she was going to get under the table. And of course, it was graduation days, so there was some confusion and so forth. So she made it to the meal without getting caught. Now we had to get out. So same, reverse the process. A bunch of cadets, tall, got her and got out and so forth. And then we thought about what we just did. We realized we must have been crazy to do that. They could have kept me from graduating or anything or so forth. But anyway, here's a picture of her. Let's see.
That is hilarious.
Here's a picture of her.
That was a bold move, Bob. We were talking about that before. Like they could have got some serious trouble for that.
I was just going to say, I'll just interject this. When I went to speak to the wrestling team in 2016 at our 50th reunion, I took all these pictures and stuff along, and they just loved looking at the different pictures. But one of the things they were most interested in was the disciplinary reports, for the rooms. And
explain to them what you're showing on the camera in case they can't see it.
Okay, this is a disciplinary report. There, get it up here correctly. Then I'll explain it. Anyway, the upperclassmen or the tax used to inspect the room and everything. So I got, then this first one, 2 demerits for dirty glass on 10 July 1962. 3 demerits for no card displayed for shoes being repaired. 3 demerits for carrying fatigues while marching to the engineering fundamentals class. And khakis improperly displayed. 1 shirt button wasn't buttoned. So anyway, they could run you out on if somebody didn't like you, they could just keep getting the demerits, and you'd have to walk the area, and they actually could have run you out.
Wow, very, very strict. A little more strict than definitely some of the things we had to deal with.
Well, you have to.
Yeah, sure.
You have to wonder how valuable was that to have a demerit on a dirty glass. But anyway.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Getting into some specific Army wrestling talk, you mentioned how Army had 3 All-Americans in your class. That's the only time in Army history. And we know you got a lot of stories when it comes to wrestling. Some of the ones that you kind of talked to us before was some of the rivalries and with some of the teams in the Easterns, like Lehigh. We know one of those big matches was you and Mike Caruso, who was a 3-time NCAA champ, that dual meet your yuck year. Maybe give us a couple of your top highlight, favorite, or most notable wrestling memories. It could be about the actual mat or just teammate experiences, anything.
I have a few of them, so I'll go through quickly. One in particular, Mike Caruso, I wrestled him at in the auditorium, big, huge auditorium at West Point. And it was a great anticipated match. And he actually came up a weight. So he was a 23-pounder, and I was a 30-pounder. And then for the Nationals, my senior year, I cut down to 23. Because Utaki, a 3-time national champion of Oklahoma State, was at 30. So anyway, this match is going on, and the match ended up to be 7-2. But during the match, somebody come running into the auditorium and said, your van from the Bethlehem, Pennsylvania Globe Gazette is on fire. You better go out. So the reporter thought they're just trying to get him out of there so he can't see Caruso wrestle. So another guy come up and told him, and they went back and forth, and finally convinced the man from the Bethlehem Globe Gazette that his big van from the office was on fire. And he sits there for a while and goes back and forth, says some swear word, and says, "Let it burn. Cruz is getting beat. This is history." And his van burned down in the west parking lot. It was in ashes when he came out. I know that story because I've been told by people who were actually there. Another particular story is that Mark Skirman and Robbie and I were all going to be in the finals of the Easterns, our junior year, college year, as you call it. And I had to wrestle Mike Johnson in the finals. I wrestled Paratori in the semis and upset him, and then from Lehigh, and then had to wrestle Mike Johnson in the finals. He had won the Outstanding Wrestling Award the year before for Pitt, and he was the one in high school that they were talking about that was a 4-time in Pennsylvania, and he was a year older than me. And I didn't know this, but Mike Johnson was Mark Skirman, my roommate's hero in high school. So he wouldn't tell me anything about him. I never asked him or anything and so forth. But Mark thought I was going to get clobbered, by Mike Johnson. So anyway, there's a picture in the Fighting Back book that I took Mike Johnson down with two seconds left. And I came off the mat, and there's Mark literally sitting in the stands sobbing, just like he lost his mother or something, sobbing, crying. And he had to wrestle in a couple matches in the finals. And his dad came up to him and said, "I know my son, when he gets touched like that, he wouldn't even be able to wrestle." So he lost to somebody he's beaten him before many times, and then turns around and takes third in the Nationals that year. But that's how close we were. Let's see here. Any others that you can think of? I'm looking to see if I got to tell you this one Radiator Story. If you want to hear some funny stories. we lived in the North area, and we had these old radiators, and you couldn't control the radiator in the room, so it was always too hot in there. So you had to keep the windows open, no matter how cold it was. So we'd regulate the temperature in the room by lowering or closing the top window a little bit. So Mark and I would take turns. One night, I woke up with the most scary scream I've ever heard in my life. I said, "Mark, what's the matter? What's the matter?" He said, "I went to close the window, and my male organ fell out of my shorts and landed right on the radiator, and I have a 2.5-inch burn, and I'm in pain. Help me." How am I going to help you? So the next day, Mark goes to sick call with his 2.5-inch burn, and that went through the core in 15 minutes. And then we had all kinds of.
I could make a joke or two right now, but I'm not gonna do it.
Okay, I'm trying to think of any other stories.
Can you talk about when you were telling me and Brian off air about the Lehigh match and just how intense it was in the police escorts? If you can just talk about maybe some of those rivalries with the teams in the conference and maybe even the Navy match and just how intense it was.
Sure. Well, one that comes to mind right away was Lehigh. And Jerry Lehman and Coach Alice went to college together at the University of Northern Iowa. And anyway, Lehigh had a lot easier time recruiting than Coach Alice did at Western, But anyway, we had heard about what they call the snake pit at Lehigh, and I'm going to tell you what it's like wrestling there. For me, I loved it, but for some wrestlers, it intimidated. It was called a snake pit, and there were so many people there that when we came out of the locker room into the big hallway, they had a police escort to take us out to the gym. We went to the gym, and the place was packed to the rafters all the way down to the edge of the mat. There was no side mats around the regular mat. If you got thrown off the mat, you got thrown into the crowd and they'd throw you back in again. And they told us ahead of time that never would they say anything bad, or they would pinch you or swear. They just love wrestling so much that they just would throw you back in the mat. And anyway, there's one particular need. Somebody just sent me this newspaper article recently. You can read it there.
Joe Petro faces unbeaten Steenlage in a featured battle.
Okay, I had beaten Paratori and Caruso the year before. So anyway, Joe Paratori and I wrestled, and I ended up in a tie. So, and the competition was very keen back then. Navy had coached by Ed Perry, and I'll be very straightforward that way. Navy at that time, and probably still does, had an extremely good recruiting system because of where their location was and so forth, and a lot of the graduates involved in recruiting and so forth. And now what you're doing is counteracting it, because recruiting makes a difference. So we always had a tough time against Navy. And one year we had them beat, and then one of our wrestlers made a mistake with 3 seconds left and got taken down, and we ended up losing. So always close matches with Navy. Ed Perry, who was a 3-time national champion at Pitt, was the coach and very much a gentleman, and this tremendous rivalry and with Lehigh, Penn State, just you know, a lot of times we were beating Penn State, a lot of these schools and so forth. One story I got to tell you that most people won't believe is not a wrestling story, but a football story. One time, I think my Kyle year, the first year, we were going to play Penn State again, and I think we beat them, upset them the year before at West Point, but now the game is going to be at Penn State. And Rockwell McGurk was one of the cheerleaders, you know, for the Army team. And they had everybody in such a frenzy. All of a sudden, one of the cadets hollers out, "Stack tables, stack tables." And so I didn't want to get into that trouble as an athlete, so I headed for the walls. And these big tables, I think they still have in the mess hall, they started stacking these tables, one on top of the other, on top of the other. I thought we're all going to go to jail over this. And they stacked these tables all 3, 4, 5 high. And the next day, we all got reprimanded, and everybody had to pay so much for the damage and so forth. But nobody got really, really in trouble because more or less the whole Corps was involved and so forth. Anyway, let's
go back. They were still ripping off cadet accounts back in the 60s. That's great.
Yeah, for real.
One thing I can just share with you, some of the questions here. We had a lot of good assistant coaches at that time. We had Greg Ruth, who wrestled at Lehigh and then quit Lehigh and then coached at West Point for a while and then went on to be a 2-time national champion at Oklahoma. We had Grace Simons, a 3-time national champion at Lock Island State. We had Freddie Powell, a national champion. But the one who helped me the most was Grace Simons. I never had any really, really good takedowns, just persistent. And he said, "I'm going to teach you the high cross." And he drilled me hour after hour after hour after hour after hour. In fact, in the Coast Guard tournament our senior year, Oklahoma State was there, and Utah. I was at 30. Utaki and I wrestled. And I think I even took down Utaki with the high crotch. And the score ended up to be 7-4 or something like that. And usually his matches were not that close. So he and I are in the shower room after the match, after that weight class or whatever. And he comes in, and he's from Japan with his bar of soap and a brush, and it bows over a little bit and asks me to scrub his back. I'm like, I'm from Iowa. I'm kind of homosexual. What do you want me to scrub his back for? So he hands it to me and turns around. So I walk up and scrub his back, brush him, rinsed him off and everything, and I'm sweating and so forth. And then he turns around and gives me a real official bow and says something in Japanese. So I go out of there and ask Coach Allison, "What is going on? How come you didn't prepare me for this?" You know, he said it was a great honor because most of the matches weren't that close. But anyway, I could take down. There wasn't anybody that I never was able to take down with the high crotch, including Peretori and Crusoe. And the only disadvantage of that is that when I was in the Army, it was a reaction. So I'd be at a formal function or something, and somebody shake hands and they jerk my arm, and I'm going for the high crotch at an official party. It's like, get back in position, you know. Okay.
I think that's the wrestler in all of us.
Right.
I think that what.
Pardon me?
Yeah, I was going to say at Jimmy Rafferty's wedding last year, there's hand fighting on the dance floor going on for at least an hour or two.
Well, at our wedding, My wife's from southern Minnesota, from northern Iowa. A lot of the wrestling team from West Point came, and then my high school team was there. And it was a non-alcoholic party, although I think somebody snuck something in. So what do wrestlers do when they get together at a party? They're going to wrestle. So the next morning, most of us had carpet burns on our forehead. So when we went to the wedding and walked in my wife's house, she saw those mad burns, and that's the only time I ever seen her upset. So all our wedding pictures got mad burns on our foreheads.
Oh gosh.
Is there any area that we're forgetting here? Just trying to think of.
No, it's great. I want to move into some of the social topics and some of the things that happened while you're at West Point, starting with when President Kennedy was killed. That happened during your time. What was the reaction of the academy, and was there anything maybe that changed because of that?
Okay, I'll start with General MacArthur's talk and then lead up to that. General MacArthur gave the talk, the famous talk, soldiers never died, they just fade away, from the poop deck at West Point in May of 1962. And I went to West Point in July of 62. The coach invited me out, made a way for me to come out for the graduation of 1962, because President Kennedy was going to speak. And he spoke in that big it was raining, so they weren't in the auto coming outside. So we do this big field house, same place where I wrestled Caruso. Anyway, Kennedy gave this talk, and it was, I just can't explain it. It was just, there was so much charisma and everything to it. You just were in awe to hear the man, because he was so dedicated and so forth. Well, so everybody's loved President Kennedy at the Academy, as far as I know. So I think our third class in the morning or sometime, we got called in, and somebody came in and announced that Kennedy had got assassinated. And it was really, 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 really terrible. And the long-range effects of that were profound, because I've studied Kennedy in detail, and anybody can search this out and says it's documented, it can be found out, that President Kennedy planned on having all American soldiers out of Vietnam by the end of 1965. Within 24 hours of President Johnson becoming president, he reversed that. If Kennedy had not gotten killed, I would not have lost one out of every 20 of my classmates, one out of every 6 when they got wounded or maimed, and many of us wouldn't have PTSD today, all because of that situation. And I walked the place where Kennedy got killed, and was going to give my opinion. Oswald could not have killed Kennedy. From all my studies, this is my opinion. There was many shooters. Kennedy was shot by one of those things, on the road you lift up, for the pipe and so forth. That's my opinion, where Kennedy got shot. But anyway, for a long time, I was very bitter about that whole thing, but things happen in life, and it is what it is. Bob Arvin, the captain of the wrestle team the year before me, got killed in Vietnam. And then, of course, the gym's named after him. And his wife was never the same person afterwards. And through the years, I wanted to reach out to her and couldn't get a hold of her, and talk to Bob's family and so forth. And about 6 months ago, I was able to talk to Bob Arvin's wife. It was, things happen in life that are just like a lot of things are happening now. There's no explanation for sometimes, yeah. But it was a great loss, and a shocker to see how evil takes place at high levels sometimes,
Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to say about Bob Arvin? I mean, the gym's named after him. We all grew up training there, obviously, but I think probably our knowledge of him as a man and an officer is limited. But you have personal experience with him.
Yes, yes, we were all very close. You know, the wrestling team was very close. And even though he was brigade commander, there was nothing, you know, that we had to watch it or anything, in practice or on trips or anything like that. But he was one of those from Ypsilanti, Michigan. He's just one of those rare individuals that you just couldn't help but to love and care about. Kind, strict, leadership. You just couldn't say enough things about him. And he has got wounded and got better and then volunteered, I think, for one last patrol or something, as a sniper. But he was a great person. And anything that you ever hear about him is all true.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful thing that they named the gym after him.
Absolutely. So we kind of already started talking about Vietnam and the escalation of force that happened in '65. And I was telling you just before the show, interestingly enough, that the class of 2005 experienced kind of the same thing with the events that happened on 9/11 and how their experience at West Point changed, much like yours. What was the message that the Academy was telling the cadets at the time when things were picking up in Vietnam and you guys were going into your first year? And what were your thoughts individually as you approached choosing your branch and post and all the different things that were going into what your future was going to look like?
Excellent question. Our plebe year, there was no talk about Vietnam. And then as time passed, all of a sudden some former cadets ended up there. And so pretty soon started having funerals at West Point. And all of a sudden we realized that we're going to go there. And I myself was not interested in being any Army hero, so I did not want to go into the infantry, and I couldn't if I wanted to because it filled up so fast. So I wanted to go into the Signal Corps, and I thought that would be safer. But as it turned out, it wasn't any safer because of Tet Offensive in '68, we had to start going on patrols and so forth. And I'll just tell you one incident that how things can happen in war. They needed bodies in Vietnam so fast that anybody that took chemistry or physics in high school was automatically, as enlisted men, put in the Signal Corps, and many of them didn't even have hardly any training with a weapon. And when Tet Offensive hit, I was called into a meeting at 1700 hours as a company commander. And they said at daybreak, you're taking 1/3 of your company in a helicopter and you're going to go on a patrol. And I stood up and I said, sir, this is insane. And I told them what I just told you. They don't have any infantry training. This is insane. And some colonel says, sit down, Captain, or I'm going to relieve you. So I started to sit down, because I thought, this is crazy. Then I realized they're going to put somebody else in there. They're still going to send them out if I don't go with them. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I shut up. We stayed up all night long, took out the Ranger handbook, taught them safety, the weapon. They didn't know anything. And because they were Signal Corps people that were just trained to run the radios and the big equipment and so forth. So we went out the next morning, and it was like no matter what you told them, they weren't scared at all. And it was like a Boy Scout hike until, fortunately, we got fired up on early, and then they gradually learned, and then they became proficient on patrols and so forth. But the one thing that happened to me in Vietnam that changed my life is that when I first got to Vietnam on the 15th of December 1967, it was right before the BHAW show, which went all over Vietnam. I was at Pleiku with the 4th Infantry Division, So I had something to do with putting that show and getting the equipment for Bob Hope and Raquel Welch and Leslie Uggams and the band and everything. So my first 2 weeks in Vietnam, man, this is great being in Singapore. Then on the 31st of December, I got called into the colonel's office. And in so many words, he said, Airborne Ranger, West Point Wrestler, we're giving you this assignment. Next day at 5 o'clock, 1700 hours, I landed in a small area. It's probably only two blocks in diameter at most. And some very, very high top secret crypto equipment there that they needed to be working, and there was some problem. And the previous lieutenant either got killed or was wounded or something. I don't know what happened. So I got there 1700 hours. I remember going to the tent, and the first thing I thought of, if we're ever overrun, who are they going to go after first? They're going to go after the lieutenant, the sergeants, and so forth. And here the lieutenant tent is right in the middle of this open area. You know, I shouldn't even sleep there. So I thought, well, I'll wait till tomorrow night to find some place to sleep. It was already all this stuff going on. Well, and the other thing I realized, the sandbags around the tent only went up to the level of the cot. Well, I'm laying on top of the cot. We're going to make it. Anyway, there's all kinds of things I saw wrong. But anyway, about midnight, the first night, we got hit. And it was just like the 4th of July. And dark, pitch dark, and then flares go on and off. And we found out afterwards that a suicide squad drugged themselves up, said goodbye to their families, and they're going to kill as many Americans, destroy as much equipment as they could. And they wore just like a swimming suit, and their bodies were all greased up. So anyway, I'm crawling out of the tent along the sandbags, pulling my M16 and my radio in case we had a call on reinforcements or something. But anyway, the flares go on, off. Flare went off, it's like daylight. Standing 15 feet in front of me was a Viet Cong with an AK-47, like this. I'm crawling along the ground. So I knew instantaneously, as soon as the next flare comes off, we're going to have to face off. And as a flare went off, I'm pulling my M16 up. He's got it at the shoulder, ready to pull the trigger. And if you've ever been driving and your deer runs in front of you in the car and you feel the impact, I was already feeling the impact of the bullets in my head, in my body, feeling. And at that moment, one of the soldiers, about 15 feet to my right, had his M16 on automatic and hit the Viet Cong right across the forehead and took his head off. And the next morning, you have to live with all this carnage in your mind, and you're never the same again. The Vietnam War, in one sense, was the worst thing to happen to me. In the other sense, it was the best thing to happen to me, because it forced me to go back to day one and find out what life is all about. And that's been to my advantage. That's why at age 76, I'm like a 50-year-old, except I had an accident in 85 with my pelvis. So the VA encourages us to share, and I couldn't share anything until 2 years ago. Four of our 5 sons, we have 8 children and daughters, took me to Vietnam in January of 2018 for 2 weeks. And we went through the whole country, went to the battle sites of Dak To, Kon Tum, a place called Oasis. And I was platoon leaders at these places before I became company commander. And Oasis was completely wiped out. Every American killed about 9 months after I left there. But anyway, going back to Vietnam was so beneficial because we talked to members of the Viet Cong and the NBA. And every one of them told me, they said, it wasn't the soldiers that we were against. We could have been friends with the American soldiers, but it was Russia. It was China. And the American government had forced us to have this war. And these family members would say that their father and grandfather would drink strong rice wine because of his PTSD until he died. One family member took me out in a boat, a small boat. She said, this is where my family member fought. He fought in the water, had a reed for straw, and showed me all the different places. And then, even though it's a communist country, they are allowed to use the internet. So they know the truth about the United States. They know the truth. And they love the United States because of the free enterprise system. So when I came back, I was a changed person. I thought they're going to hate me and all that. And it was just the opposite. It was a wonderful experience. And I give talks to veterans and, whenever I get a chance and talk about that. And for years I give talks in schools and corporations and stuff, and still give talks if anybody ever wants to have any kind of a talk on different things. You mentioned, Jordan, about please tell about what it was like when we got back. When we got back, it was horrible. It was worse than being in Vietnam, because you come back and you expect people to at least be decent to you. They spit on you. They throw vomit at you. It was so bad that the post commanders ordered wigs. And so if their soldiers took a weekend leave, they could wear a wig and wouldn't get picked on all the time. That's one soldier lost his arm in Vietnam, and his parents and her parents went out to eat at a restaurant. And this lady says, what happened to his arm? And the father-in-law says, my son-in-law fought in Vietnam and lost his arm. And the waitress goes up and spits in his face and said, too bad you didn't die. It was awful. And the reason they're kind to soldiers now is because of what they did to Vietnam vets. That's one of the reasons the suicide rate is so high. Every day, 22 veterans kill themselves. Not all Vietnam veterans, because war is so horrible. Anyway, that was a tough time. Very tough time. And one of the things that I was recommended by the VA is to buy a farm and to work from home and give talks and raise cattle and be around plants and animals. We raised our 8 children on the farm. We homeschooled them for many, many years, and that was very helpful. We still live on the farm, and if I'm having a bad day, I go out and work. We don't have livestock, but there's plenty of things to do, garden, mowing lawn, and so forth. So this country has made a lot of mistakes, a lot of wars we should have never been in. But we are the soldiers, and we have to do what we're doing, what we're told. And we have to learn how to survive. And one of the things that has helped me through the years goes back to what I was talking about earlier in wrestling in 7th grade. I learned how to be thankful. Every single day, be thankful for things. Be thankful for things that even though they seem bad. And so I'm thankful for my dad being the way he was. Because if he wasn't, I never would have had a desire to make something out of my life, because I wanted my dad to love me. If I could win one more wrestling match, maybe my dad would love me. So a negative turned out to be a positive. 5 years ago, I had shingles because of nightmares. I had redness on down the right side of my body. 7 days later, all of a sudden I had some kind of new redness on this side of my body. They took me in, they thought, to Toma VA hospital. They thought I had Rocky Mountain fever. They tested me all out. And one thing I failed to mention is that I always, every day, I write down the things I'm thankful for. Then I draw a line and write down the things that are wrong in my life, and I try to be thankful for them, because I see there's a pattern when you're thankful for things that seem bad, that they're going to turn out to your good sooner or later. So I'm writing down, I'm thankful for shingles. Well, anyway, some people thought I was crazy when they heard that. Well, I'm down there at the VA hospital in Toma, and all of a sudden they come in after all the reports and said, I want to tell you, you got bad Lyme disease. If you didn't have shingles, we never would have discovered your Lyme disease because it was going into your organs and you would be an invalid or something the rest of your life. So now I'm writing down, I'm thankful for shingles, I'm thankful for Lyme disease. One day I'm down there, I'm light-skinned, I'm out on the farm, and they found a little spot up here, and then we better check for melanoma. And so they took a biopsy. I'm getting out of the chair, and all of a sudden they said, they've got a little dot here. Why don't we just check that too? They checked that, and I had melanoma. 3 operations later, I got a hole in my cheek like that. They're going for the 4th operation. They called my son, who's a doctor, and they said, we're pretty scared. But anyway, they got it on the 4th time. And the reason I have this crease in my cheek is because they had to rearrange all my skin to fill up that hole. And it says, so happens tomorrow I have to go to the VA hospital in Toma to get my skin checked. Every 6 months they check my whole body. So I know that being thankful makes a difference. I know it. I've lived it all these years. And also to doing kind deeds. If it's not your nature to do a kind deed, make a practice of doing a kind deed every single day. Don't go to bed until you do it, and pretty soon it's going to become a second nature to you. And one of the things that people don't realize, if this becomes second nature to you, you have things happen to you that you're protected from. It's like what goes around comes around, or however that saying goes. It's like if you're a long jumper or a pole vaulter or something, it's like being an average athlete, but you've got somehow miraculously the gravity from the moon is on the earth, and you're the only one that has it. So even though you're an average athlete, you still can jump farther, you still can pole vault farther, because these laws of the universe work for you. And you as a wrestler will see your record go up by simply vowing to do a kind thing every single day and be thankful and put it in a book. I can tell you a story about a wrestling team I talked to a couple of years ago, that the wives, the coaches, some of the fans and the wrestlers started doing that. They went from here to here in 1 year, because it doesn't work. It doesn't work exactly according to what you want sometimes, but I can give you example after example of things that have happened to me, how many times I should have died. I could just go on and on and on. So if there's one point that I'd like to leave with everybody, excuse me, is that if you want to find happiness in life, do a kind deed every time, every day. Become second nature, and write down the things you're thankful, including the things that seem wrong, and it'll come back and help you. And it'll help you in wrestling, it'll help you get through West Point, it'll help you get through life. Sorry for getting so emotional, carried away.
Oh, thank you for sharing all that. And I know it's not easy to do, and we can hear your emotions. And I know me and Brian were both tearing up at one point, just the rawness and your honesty with everything. And we don't have enough opportunities this generation to hear from the experiences of our Vietnam vets. Thank you for everything that you went through. And I think we can all learn something from your heart of thankfulness and how we can apply that to our lives. I appreciate it, Bob.
If anybody wants to read more about it, they can go to my website, www.bobsteenlage.com, or somebody's looking for a speaker. Also, I have a Facebook site that's not political. I had political stuff in it for a while because I was so upset what they're doing to veterans and so forth. But finally, I just cut out all political stuff and went back to my original purpose of my Facebook site is for inspiration. I have simple inspiration site. So if you just want to get inspired, you want to see a nice scene, you want to see animals, good stories, and so forth, you can go there, and because I add to it almost every day. That's under my name also. But I'm driven to try to help anybody that ever wants to talk. I got plenty of time to talk, on the phone. If anybody wants a copy of my fighting back, you can contact me, and I'll do whatever I can to help anybody.
Bob, I didn't say it before, but I really appreciate you sharing. That was, I'm sure, extremely hard. And one of the things I picked up on, was the fact that you were able at such a young age to grasp, that sense of gratefulness, thankfulness, and, thinking, when you're in 6th or 7th grade, I looking back, I was like, man, I didn't realize those things till I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And that's really commendable that you were able to do that at such a young age, and then use that and helping everybody along the way. It's a true blessing. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and especially your stories of Vietnam. Well, we live in a different time now where we come back from war and we're celebrated, and it makes things a lot easier. And I couldn't imagine coming back from deployments and being treated the way you guys were treated. I wouldn't have been able to do it, I don't think. And so I really appreciate you sharing that.
Well, I think we covered a lot, and I'm really thankful that you were able to take time to do this with us, Bob, and share some of your life and things that you went through. And maybe we'll have you on again here in the future and get some more funny stories and different stuff from you.
Thanks for tuning in to the BHAW Radio Show. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. If there's something you'd like to hear on a future show, reach out to us on any of our social media, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Or you can reach us at email, bhaw.radio@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and as always, go Army, be Navy.